Hello, hello. Thank you for participating in my interview project. So
Thanks for having me.
we'll start off with some introductions and background. So my name is Olivia. I'm currently in AAS 360, and this interview is part of my project where I'll be exploring sociolinguistic themes. If you could give a quick introduction of yourself.
Yeah, hi. My name is James. I'm currently a senior nursing student and happy to be here.
Great. So the first question I have for you is, what is your linguistic background? So essentially, are there other languages you speak if you have a second or native language, and how did you learn that language?
Yeah, so my linguistic background is I speak English as my primary language. I would say my second language is English is also my native language. My second language is Mandarin Chinese, and my third language is Spanish. How did I learn it? Well, English being my native language, I grew up learning English. Uh, Mandarin Chinese, I would say I give credit to my grandma on my dad's side, my paternal grandma. And then Spanish was the language that I learned throughout elementary, middle school, and high school.
Okay. And is there a particular dialect of Mandarin that you speak, or is the quote unquote mainland or standard Mandarin?
Mandarin,
Yes.
Mandarin.
Okay.
Like, you mean like Cantonese Mandarin or like, well, Cantonese is its own dialect, but I guess my family is from Taiwan, so I guess it's Mandarin that's from Taiwan.
Okay. Do you feel comfortable using the Chinese language?
I would say I'm conversational in it. I'm comfortable enough to be able to um, speak with international students that I had in class, comfortable enough to speak to patients in which I work with or have clinicals for, and I'm also would say, I guess, not afraid to speak it, even though I may not be the most proficient in the room.
And would you say you often communicate with people who speak Chinese, and why or why not?
Yeah, well, I definitely speak to my grandparents in Chinese. I would say that in my field of work, I've used it a lot more frequently than I have expected. Living in New York City, living in such a diverse um, city as well, um, it is often the middle language used between people who, let's say, only know Cantonese, only know Taiwanese, Shanghainese. Like Mandarin is the universal common middle ground that um, we're able to get by to converse or to get information, an exchange of ideas.
Okay. Now I'm going to introduce a topic called diglossia, and diglossia is a situation in which two languages or two varieties of the same language are used under different conditions within a community or conversation, often by the same speakers. Do you think diglossia plays a role in your Chinese usage?
Oh, different conditions within a community. Uh,
For example, sometimes certain dialects of Chinese might be considered a privileged dialect where they're used in more professional contexts, and then other dialects might be used in more personal and social and quote unquote lower privilege contexts.
oh, I see, I see. Um, so given how my family is from Taiwan, um, my grandparents and on my mom's side, they speak Taiwanese, which is, um, a dialect. And I would say that they use that dialect because my generation doesn't know that dialect. They use that dialect to kind of speak behind my back
Okay.
in a, um, yeah, I guess in a way to like make fun of me or to criticize me without wanting me to know.
Okay. Yeah. So diglossia is more of two different dialects or two different languages, and they're used by the same community or like even within the same conversation. But then there's that contrast that happens between the dialects or languages. And do you think there are other examples where you can elaborate on situations like that?
Um, so on my dad's side, we have a close-knit family friend group that were born in Taiwan, then immigrated to Costa Rica during their um, childhood and teenage years, and then immigrated to the U.S. during high school and college time. And I would say during those gatherings, um, the languages are pretty interchangeable at the dinner table, where we'll start off with English and then they'll pivot to like a Spanish, um, like a Spanish saying, and then they'll pivot to like Mandarin. So it's very interesting how the three languages get thrown across the table. Does that kind of answer your question? Or,
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, so now we're going to move on to questions that are more focused on language usage and how it affects you in the personal context versus professional. Because
Mhm.
sociolinguistics is the study of how like society and language are intertwined. So how would you say that your Chinese usage differs in personal versus professional settings?
Uh, so in a personal setting, I speak to my grandparents, and I don't feel as pressured, speaking. In a professional setting, mostly it's used in a medical context, and that I always feel like I need to have a well thought question or formulate my thoughts. Take a couple seconds to think about what I'm going to say, um, because in an emergent setting, those are seconds in which you really need that important information to determine, well, if I'm going to give this medication, are they allergic to it? Or, you know, are they, do they have a past medical history that is important to disclose before they go fully unconscious? So that's how I guess the usage differs from a personal versus professional setting.
And aside from feeling that pressure, do you think there are specific examples in the way you may enunciate certain syllables or the tone that you may have or the way that your language is executed?
Um, I feel like with um, experience and repetition, like your enunciations become better. But also, thankfully, with technology, there's, Google Translate or there's the audio feature, or even now, actually, we have interpreters, whether in the hospital or out of the hospital. There's something called language line. There's a phone number we can call that. There's always an interpreter that we can get a hold of who can help translate things that can become much more complex than in my vocabulary bank.
How would you compare, or can you make some comparisons between how those differences are relevant to Chinese versus English? Right.
What do you mean?
Like personal versus professional Mandarin versus personal professional English. Right? Are there experiences that you may have in English that you don't encounter with Mandarin or vice versa?
I think the differences is more, I guess, the usage. Obviously, I use English almost every day in my life. Mandarin, I really only I predominantly have to use it amongst my grandparents. My parents, having immigrated to the US during middle school and high school, they speak more English in the household. Um, and in a professional setting, it's never it's never planned that I'm going to be using my Mandarin. It's always when I happen to encounter a patient that I have, that I just kind of, you know, whip it out of my toolbox. Um, yeah. Was there the follow-up part to your question I didn't answer?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
Now, how would you say Chinese is tied to your personal life versus your professional life? How Chinese is a connection there?
So in my personal life, I give credit to my paternal grandmother. She practically, I would say, raised me when my parents had to work. So that's how I pretty much formed the ability to hold conversations in Mandarin, in regards to like reading and writing, as opposed to going to church on Sundays. I went to Chinese school from kindergarten to 10th grade. Um, and, uh, took, in my lifetime, I visited Taiwan twice, and that was actually very, um, beneficial to use my speaking, reading, and writing there. Um, in regards to my professional life, I would say that it is a bonus to be multilingual. You're able to, uh, so like when a patient speaks a language that's not English and you are able to speak the language, there's a sense of relief that you see in that moment where they're able to be a bit more comfortable in knowing that, okay, I'm going to be cared for someone that does not have as big of a language barrier. Um, and I think that kind of makes you want to learn more. Um, and so far, Spanish and Mandarin have been the big ones. And then I've encountered Bengali, Russian, Polish. I think those are the three big ones that I've encountered a lot in my line of work.
So, would you say that this linguistic diversity is more prevalent in your personal life or your professional life? Because it sounds like you encounter a lot more linguistic variety in your professional life.
I would say I encounter it more in my professional life. In my personal life, it would be when I am seeing the family friend group that um, has the background of one in Taiwan, lived in Costa Rica, and then now lives in the States, which always happens no more than half a dozen times throughout the year. And then my grandparents, of course.
Sounds interesting how you have a lot of language exposure and experience.
Oh, it's many renditions of Happy Birthday in different languages.
And especially in in your professional life where you encounter a lot of languages. So it
Yes.
just shows the connection between society and then your professional role in a medical context, and then there's also language, so like everything is connected.
hmm
Okay. Do you think your personal versus professional ties to Chinese motivate you to learn the language? And if there's a difference in personal versus professional, that'll affect if there's a difference in your motivation as a result of those contexts.
So growing up, having gone to Chinese school on Sundays from kindergarten to 10th grade, I always felt like that was an obligation, and I would categorize this as more professional than personal. Um, and then personal, I would attribute to speaking with my grandparents. It wasn't until like after, um, actually, it wasn't until going to Taiwan for the first time and realizing how much I was able to understand, read and write, um, and also realizing my limitations on my processing power of how fast someone speaks is, it takes time to work that muscle. But after traveling abroad and after leaving the city to go to college for 4 years, I would say my language comprehension and use of it decreased. And then having worked and being back in New York City now for almost 5 years, and using it a lot more professionally, it has motivated me definitely. It has definitely motivated me more to, um, you know, continue learning and, um, realize that I don't take those 10 years that I was forced to go to Chinese school every Sunday for granted.
Okay. Now I'm going to introduce a similar concept called code switching, similar to diglossia. And code switching is when a language substitutes terminology from another language, which for us could be more commonly portrayed as Chinglish, or substituting select words you don't know in the primary language of the conversation. So examples of this would be, for example, in class we once went over how in with Cantonese, a lot of primarily Cantonese speakers, they'll say like they'll say like we have to they'll say in Cantonese, I don't know Cantonese, but they'll say like we have this presentation, but instead of saying presentation in Canto, they'll say presentation in English. I think that's not the best example. I think in Chinese it would be equivalent to like 我们今天需要 present, right? That'll be an example. And other examples may be like a similar concept is also loan words, such as how English speakers will use the term déjà vu, even though that's not English. That's a French term that was loaned over. So, given this like explanation, do you use code switching, and do you think your code switching varies in the personal versus professional context?
Um, so I think I use code switching when I don't know how to say it in Chinese. Um, I hmm, I feel like given how the history of Taiwan, it used to be occupied by Japan, that a lot of the dialect in Taiwanese is similar to Japanese, but personally, I don't feel like um, I do much code switching in my personal and professional life.
Do you think that could be due to the fact that you use English more frequently, and English doesn't really use code switching? English more so loans terms like déjà vu. We don't really code switch English into Chinese.
Uh, I I guess I I never really thought about it until you raised it up in this question, to be honest.
Because a lot of times English is the quote unquote the international language. So a lot of times in countries that use Chinese or Mandarin, whatever, they will see English as a standard and they will substitute words from their own language, whether it be Mandarin, Cantonese, whatever, with English terminology, such as 我们需要 present. But with the case of English, English is already that quote unquote standard, so you may not use as much code switching.
Oh, sorry, I'm nodding. Yeah.
Hmm?
Oh, no, no, no. I'm nodding to
Okay.
what you're saying.
Okay. So do you think that so you mentioned code switching when you don't know a certain term. Um, do you think that may be more frequent in your personal versus professional? Because when you do use Mandarin, you're going to substitute words anyway, but do you think there's a difference in how much you use it or how you use code switching and or substitution in personal versus professional?
Um, I think it's pretty balanced, to be honest.
Okay, we will keep going. Now, how do you think your usage of Chinese impacts your sense of identity?
I would say that it, like, if someone were to ask me, about myself, it's something that I include, that I speak um, more than one language. I also, this kind of actually goes back to the previous question where like I'm a lot of the foods growing up that I know in Chinese, it's hard to then realize if I'm trying to expose a friend to this food, what it is in English. And sometimes I'll just end up calling it that. And I'm trying to give some trying to think of some examples. Um, and sometimes when I try to explain what this food item is in English, it gives me that initial like, huh, it's a very odd way of explaining what this dish is. This Chinese dish is in English.
Okay. Now, how would you say that the context of your language usage, so personal versus professional, impacts how you associate yourself with your language, or overall how it shapes your identity?
I guess it adds additional layers to my life. Um, I definitely, it's different worlds, I guess. And then when they combine, it's always nice blending, a friend group and, a family group or, you know, bringing something that, like, for example, dim sum. I have that maybe once every 2 months. And then there are some friends that I have who've never had dim sum. And like for them, it's like a brand new experience. And it's very fun to expose them to that. So I would say um, having that language ability to help spread the culture and spread um, the ideas. It's very interesting. And then when friends reciprocate in exposing me to things that I've never experienced before, it kind of opens your opportunities in your world and keeps your perspective much more wider.
Hmm. And that's a personal example of how language affects your identity. Do you think you have an example of how professional Chinese might impact your sense of identity and if there's a difference there?
I would say it definitely opened up opportunities. I have been offered the opportunity to help with um, like so as part of my profession, we have a transport team that transfers patients from uh like professionally we are asked having knowing different languages if we can accompany a patient on an international medical transport. Normally those are like hospital to hospital between communities or towns, but this is going like internationally, and I think that has definitely impacted like something that I've never thought of that I could do in my line of work.
Okay. How would you say that ties to how you identify yourself, your perception of yourself?
Um, like an extra tool in a toolbox.
Okay. Um, can you elaborate on, because identity would be things like I identify myself as like Chinese, I identify myself as so and so, or I identify myself as a strong person, or I see myself this way. Do you think that your ability to speak Chinese in personal and professional contexts impacts that perception of yourself?
Um, well, I guess if I were to introduce myself, I disclose that, I am a Taiwanese American. Um, so I would say yes.
And do you think there's a difference in how your personal Chinese affects your identity or perception versus how your professional Chinese impacts your perception?
Mm, Is there a difference in my identity personally versus professionally? No, I feel like it's the same.
Okay. So I see that Chinese and being able to use Chinese has opened up a lot of opportunities for you. It has added layers to your character, and overall, you don't personally feel much difference in how it affects your identity between personal and professional. However, the usage does differ between personal and professional. So those are some interesting differences and similarities, like some interesting insights from what you've gathered. And do you have any last comments?
Um, well, I guess like the way I was taught in regards to speaking, reading, writing is not the norm compared to people that I know that I grew up with. Um, I was taught how to speak and um, listen to Chinese through my grandma in regards to reading and writing. I learned traditional Chinese, and I know simplified is probably more common amongst people that I know. And even like I guess, the spelling of the words. I don't use phonetic spelling. I use um, what is it called? There's like Hanping or Bopomofo.
Okay.
And that's why when, someone shows me something in simplified, I don't really understand it, or shows me something in phonetic spelling, I don't quite understand it because that's just not how I was taught.
So you're saying upbringing in the early education is important too.
Yes, sure.
Okay. Is there a better way you'd like to phrase that?
Um, no, I think that's best you best summarized it. But it's nice being able to, know another language and be able to communicate with others, despite, we may not have learned it the same way. We might not know how to read or write it the same way, but at the end of the day, like speaking and listening, um, is a nice bridge.
Okay. Well, those are all the questions I have for you today. I think this was a very productive conversation and interview, and I do appreciate your time. Um, yeah. So thank you for your time. Do appreciate it.
Thank you
And
for the opportunity. I look
uh,
forward to finding out how this interview comes about afterwards.
alrighty. Thank you.